I'm Michal Friedhoff, and I'm the Assistant Administrator of EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And before we kick things off, I'd like to remind everyone to please silence your cell phones for the duration of the event. It's really just wonderful to be here in Newark, one of the cities that's really leading the way in the fight to protect people from harmful lead exposure, to announce an important new proposal. We also have several distinguished speakers today who each will talk about their efforts to get lead hazards out of our communities once and for all. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, EPA's Deputy Administrator Janet McCabe, who I know has been personally committed to this issue for so much of her career. Janet's a lifelong public servant who has also spent time working for EPA's Air Office, state environmental agencies in Indiana and Massachusetts, and at a children's environmental health advocacy organization based in Indianapolis, where she sat with parents in their homes, community centers, and schools, teaching them about where lead can be found and how it can impact the health of their families. Prior to rejoining EPA in April 2021, she was a professor of practice at the Indiana University McKinney School of Law and director of the IU Environmental Resilience Institute. Please join me in welcoming Janet to the podium.
Thank you, Michal, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see you all here, and it's a great day to be in Newark, but it's probably any day is a great day to be in Newark, right? Thank you on behalf of myself, but really on behalf of Administrator Regan and the entire Biden-Harris administration. Mayor, to you and to the state of New Jersey for hosting us today, and for your cities and the state's steadfast commitment to protecting children's health and getting the lead out of homes, buildings, schools, and child care facilities all across the Garden State. I want to thank the amazing group of children's health, environmental justice, community advocates, and families that we have gathered here today, and appreciate how much press coverage it looks like there will be so that this story can go to many, many more people. That's the key to so many public health issues, and this one in particular. And we know at EPA that communities and local governments know best when it comes to finding solutions for their public health and environmental challenges. And all of the organizations and institutions in the room here today, and many more, have significant roles to play in the development and implementation of these solutions so that we get the results that we all want. I know from my own experience, as Michal told you, that local organizations are absolutely critical when it comes to lead poisoning in particular, to make sure that it gets attention at the state and local level. At EPA, we also have a significant role to play in protecting everybody on the planet and the planet itself, and fulfilling that mission requires that every single person in this country, especially our children, have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, clean homes, buildings, and schools where they can live, learn, and play. That's why we come to work every day at the US EPA, and I know it's why so many of you do what you do. So I'm so proud to be here today to talk about this incredible next step that we're taking to protect our children and our future from the dangers of lead exposure. I know this is not the first time that people have gathered in this very room, I think, in this building, to talk about how lead is impacting the children and people of the city of Newark, and you are leaders. In fact, when we were thinking about where to hold this event, Newark was right there at the top of the list, given the effort that you all have put on it. The work to remove 23,000 lead service lines in a shorter time than anybody expected, that's pretty incredible. We're working all across the country. Absolutely. So congratulations, Mayor Baraka, and to your team for all of the efforts and the partnership that is required to make sure that the residents of this city, especially our kids, have clean and safe drinking water. And we are your partners every step of the way along that. For today's great news, I'm so proud to be able to say that this very morning back in Washington, Administrator Regan has signed a new proposal to strengthen the requirements for the removal of lead-based paint. Michal's going to talk about it in more detail, but basically it's going to set more protective levels that let us know when lead needs to be cleaned up and when that cleanup has been done properly. We know that no level of exposure to lead is good for our children, zero. So the standards that we set at the federal level for when cleanup needs to happen and when we say how clean is clean, they're incredibly important. So I am especially proud that this proposal recognizes the scientific fact that any level of lead in dust constitutes a hazard to human health. And we are doing that, we are saying that today publicly and as a basis for regulation. So this is why I wanted to be part of this announcement myself. Children's health is an incredibly important and personal issue for me. As Michal said, I worked as the executive director of an organization called Improving Kids' Environment in Indianapolis, and probably half of my time was spent on lead poisoning prevention. As she said, my work took me into kitchens and churches, daycares and preschools. Basically, any place two people would say they'd come and listen to me, I would go, even if it was way in the corners of Indiana, which takes hours. And I would talk to them, and I would feel like I came away having made a little bit of a difference in somebody's life. And that is a great feeling. I also got to work on research and policy developments to move that work forward. And some of that was pretty frustrating, to take a long time, as I know you all know. But among the most important tools to me in my role at Improving Kids' Environment were EPA's dust lead hazard rules. Because that is what EPA says goes when it comes to people being trained properly and knowing what they have to do. And if they don't do it right, government can come in and take enforcement action and make sure that it happens right. So these standards are what risk assessors and inspectors and licensed contractors understand are the requirements that they have to meet. So again, I've been a licensed risk assessor actually in my life, and so this is very personally meaningful to me. We know that exposure to lead can severely harm mental and physical development of our tiniest little people in this world who are too small to protect themselves. Lead-poisoned children are more likely to struggle academically, to experience behavior problems, and to drop out of school. Early life exposures to lead can result in adverse health impacts later in life, including high blood pressure, heart and kidney disease, and reduced fertility. To say it another way, a baby exposed to lead in her very own home, where she should be safest, as she crawls around on the floor or chews on everything in sight, could be in for lifelong challenges. And that child may never know the reason why she struggles in school or why he has anger management issues. The conversations I would have with families in Indiana were not easy, and I would hear the fear in a mom's voice when she heard what these impacts could mean for her children's future. I heard anger and guilt that they hadn't done more to protect their children. And I heard frustration that their government, their community had let them down, that we let pollutants like lead get into their drinking water and be in their homes, and that we weren't doing enough to fix it. And no parent, no community should have to carry the weight of that worry. The thing about lead poisoning is that we know what causes it. We know what we have to do to fix it. We've known this for years, but we still have such a long way to go. So that's why I am proud to be serving at EPA at this moment and to be part of an administration that understands the importance of environmental and public health protection, understands the role that the federal government should play in addressing these problems, and understands and cares about the risks that our children face, especially poor children and children of color. So I just want to and I know I've been going on too long, we have a lot of people to hear from, but I want to mention a couple of things that we're doing at EPA that we've done since 2021. We launched a lead pipe and paint plan using $3 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law funding. At EPA, we don't usually talk in terms of billions of dollars, but thanks to this incredible legislation, we have money to put out into the community to address lead pipes, just like you've done here in Newark. It also dedicates more than $50 billion to replacing lead pipes, which protects water supplies. It helps to rebuild our drinking water and wastewater systems in a way that will be more resilient to the climate crisis. And if you've seen any of the pictures of Montpelier, Vermont, and places in upper New England and upstate New York, we need to be building our systems to withstand these kinds of things. We've launched an EPA-specific comprehensive lead strategy that outlines a number of steps that we will be taking across the offices at EPA to protect kids from lead exposure and, importantly, to reduce the racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities that we know exist when it comes to lead poisoning. We've co-sponsored a renovation, repair, and painting course right here in Newark, trained and certified 25 renovators to teach them how to know about and follow the lead renovation, repair, and painting rule, those lead-safe work practices. And one of the key things is to make sure that people understand there are people out there trained to know how to do lead work in a home with lead paint correctly. And that's who we should be hiring to do that work. Just yesterday, we announced that on October 17th and 18th, we and the Department of Housing and Urban Development will co-host a virtual public workshop to get stakeholder input on the detection, measurement, and characterization of lead-based paint to ensure that our definition of lead-based paint works to protect our communities and children. We are so committed to reaching out to experts, residents, families, anybody who wants to speak to government to provide their insight for how we can do a better job of protecting public health. And now today we're announcing this incredible step forward. So together we're working to take cities like Newark, great cities like Newark, into the future with safer and healthier and more resilient water systems, homes, buildings, and schools. And President Biden and Administrator Regan's environment agenda are making that vision a reality. This is a great day. So thank you again for having us here, and it's my honor to turn the podium over to Mayor Baraka.
So just want to obviously thank Deputy Administrator McCabe, Assistant Administrator Friedhoff for thinking it not robbery to show up in Newark. We appreciate you and your presence, and Administrator Regan for all his efforts and assisting us here in the city of Newark and understanding the kind of difficulties we have navigating trying to remove lead from people's homes and the intersection of race and poverty in that at the same time, and how to do that equitably is incredibly important. So the Biden-Harris administration investing money, real money, in this is very important. And as you know, as was stated, we were in this exact very room when we were announcing the fact that there was lead seeping into the pipes of Newark residents. It was a very crowded room and a difficult room at that, and a difficult time ahead. Since then, by God's grace and the work of the folks here, we were able to pull our way out of that by replacing 23,000 lead service lines in the city. But we have a more pernicious kind of way that lead is getting into our children, and that's through lead paint and dust in people's homes. And that has been a longer struggle that we've been dealing with in Newark for a very, very long period of time. And so being able to invest this kind of money to help us rid lead out of people's homes permanently is incredibly important for us in the city of Newark and for people across this country. So we applaud that and are thankful for that. In fact, personally, we found lead in my home when I had when my child was just 2 years old. And thanks to the programs that we have here in Newark, we had to move out of my home for at least 2 months to get them to abate the lead out of the house because I had a baby in the home. I would have known nothing about any of that if I did not have a baby in the home. And if we weren't going through this lead situation, my wife forced me to get all the tests in the world. So we test the water, we test this, we test that, and we actually found lead dust in our home. And we had to move out in order to get it abated. And thankfully enough that Newark has a program to help us abate lead. But it's not big enough. We need to do it more. And so any investment in this effort is incredibly important to me personally, and obviously important to the people of this city and in this great nation. So we thank you for your partnership. This is great, great, great work. And we're more than happy to host you here in the city of Newark to make this announcement and clarion call to remove lead from people's homes. Thank you.
I think we have. Are you speaking next? I don't have and your name is Jomo Rose, right? I wanted to make sure someone introduced you. Well, thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Morose. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran and a homeowner here in Newark, New Jersey. Firstly, I would like to thank the Honorable Mayor Ross Baraka for inviting me and extending the honor of sharing this platform as a spokesperson for such an important topic. Many of us may have limited understanding or may not even know about the dangers of lead exposure. Today, I would like to share my experience. After my tenant's grandchild, who was hospitalized and found to have been exposed to lead, I became very concerned. So I began some research and realized the dangers of lead to younger children. My research also led me to the City of Newark's lead abatement grants. I applied, was approved, and inspections were subsequently conducted. Firstly, by the city's lead inspector, followed by a consultant who estimated the scope of work to be conducted. There was a scheduled pre-bid walkthrough that included myself, Felix, the program manager, the consultant, and contractors bidding on the project. Before the work started, the managers and all involved were very meticulous in ensuring the tenant's personal belongings were protected, as well as keeping me informed about the abatement process. Also, an informed consent form was issued to me indicating that I would abide by the rules and regulations, that I would inform any and all future tenants of the disclosure rule, which states that there is lead-based paint in the house, and I will closely monitor any future lead paint hazards. So, one of the main tenets of this grant is to provide priority to low-income families when renting, preferably to those with children under the age of 6. I cannot stress enough how important it is for homeowners to know about the dangers of the presence of lead, to educate themselves, and to seek assistance through available programs. I'm happy to have found this program and felt privileged when they visited, inspected my home, and made the necessary adjustments to make my home lead safe. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that story, and hearing it is a reminder to all of us about why this work is so urgently and vitally important. So I'm really honored to be here in Newark to announce a reduction of the lead paint dust standards to protect families and children across the country from the hazards of lead paint exposure. Let's start with the basics. As Janet mentioned, there is no safe level of lead. Lead exposure can pose a significant health threat and cause irreversible and lifelong health effects, including behavioral problems, lower IQ, slow development, and more. Too often, it's our children, the most vulnerable residents of already overburdened communities, who are the most impacted by the toxic legacy of lead-based paint. Simply put, exposure to lead can reduce the promise and potential of a young life in some cases, and in other cases, it can profoundly damage them forever. In addition to work Mayor Baraka and his team did to replace lead pipes that Janet mentioned, the city's also set up a robust lead program that's continuing to reverse the toxic legacy of lead in the city. So even though lead paint was banned in 1978, Newark has several zip codes that have some of the largest number of housing units built before 1960 in the country. And there's a high likelihood that lead paint is still on some of those walls and some of those buildings and daycares. And it's also likely that the more than 60-year-old paint that's on those walls can crumble and turn into dust that children might breathe, touch, and eat. And that's why the program the Newark Department of Health and Community Wellness has to identify areas with high levels of lead, screen kids for exposure, and provide a safe place for residents to live during this mitigation process is so important. And Newark's work to protect families from lead sets a fantastic example for other cities on how to locally manage this issue. As you heard from the Deputy Administrator, EPA has been laser focused on getting lead out for the past several years. We're providing funds to replace the lead pipes and getting the lead out of the drinking water faster. We're cleaning up the contaminated sites and getting the lead out of the soil faster. And today, we're proposing to strengthen the requirements for the removal of lead paint-based hazards in pre-1978 buildings and childcare facilities. We're proposing to reduce the dust lead hazard standards, which identify hazardous dust in floors and windowsills, from the levels they're set at now to any reportable level greater than 0, because there's no safe level of lead. We're also proposing to dramatically lower the dust lead clearance levels, which tell you when a lead paint cleanup has been properly done, to the lowest post-abatement dust lead levels that we believe can be reliably achieved using today's technology. That's a reduction of these levels by more than 90% since they were first set more than 20 years ago. This will ensure that after a lead hazard has been found and work to clean it up has been done, that it's been remediated to the lowest level possible before the family's cleared to return home. And if finalized, this rule is estimated to reduce the lead exposures of about 250,000 to 500,000 children under the age of 6 each year. As we see here today, tackling lead paint is not just an EPA priority. It's a cross-government challenge that we simply could not do without our state and city partners. And that's why it's my great pleasure now to pass the podium to Deputy Commissioner Sean Moriarty from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Welcome, Sean.
Well, thank you all. I'm from DEP, so I try not to bring paper. Can result in some complications with the microphone. But I want to thank you for inviting me to be here on behalf of Commissioner Sean LaTourette and our state's environmental and health stewards. Anytime you want to take such important steps to protect our children, we are always happy to host you in the state of New Jersey. So thank you. And we're proud to be part of a Murphy administration that, like the Biden-Harris administration, is working hard to lessen the risks of lead exposure to New Jersey residents, particularly our youngest and most vulnerable community members. For DEP's perspective, we're often most focused on working with communities to remove old lead service lines. So it's only fitting, of course, that we're here today in Newark, and yes, it bears repeating, that under the leadership of Mayor Baraka and his team, they accomplished a truly awe-inspiring task of replacing 23,000 lead surface lines in 3 years, which now stands as a model as the state moves to remove all lead surface lines by the year 2031. With that work bolstered by the bipartisan infrastructure law funding through our Water Infrastructure Investment Plan and our assistance program, which we call New Jersey TAP or NJ TAP, in place to help communities take advantage of these funds. While lead in drinking water is crucial, as we've discussed today, we also know that exposures from lead-based paints pose the greatest risk to public health. And it is, of course, no coincidence that many of these detrimental exposures occur in our most vulnerable communities, our already overburdened communities due to older or deteriorating buildings. Now, if we want to reduce those burdens, it is our duty as leaders, as public servants, to protect those most at risk for exposure, particularly our children, where the effects can so seriously affect their development at very, very critical stages. And that's why today's announcement of the proposed EPA rules to strengthen lead-based standards is so incredibly encouraging. As again, it bears repeating, with no safe level of lead, no safe level of lead. We say it over and over again, we have to internalize that, right? Pushing those standards down to the lowest feasible levels with, of course, supportive investment is good policy backed by good science. We in New Jersey, we're going to continue to do what we can to support lead abatement efforts. In February, our Department of Community Affairs' lead remediation and abatement program made available more than $38 million in grants to nonprofits and local governments to assist residents in their efforts to prevent lead impacts. Just a week earlier than that, in partnership with DCA and our New Jersey Department of Health, we launched an expanded version of our online potential lead exposure mapping, or PLEM tool, which can be used to identify potential areas of exposure within the state. Now, we often ask for better state, federal, and local partnership on important issues, right? And today, in a very meaningful way, we are fulfilling that goal for the people of this nation and the people of New Jersey. So again, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. Congratulations to EPA on a job well done, and our partners at EPA on a job well done. And speaking of partners, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Chloe Desir of the Ironbound Community Corporation, one of the best and most effective advocacy organizations in our fine state, and someone whose work I have had the opportunity to witness firsthand. It's not always great for me when I witness their work, because they hold us accountable, but Chloe and her team do an incredible job.
Well, thank you for that intro. It was wonderfully elaborate. She sends her regards for not being here today. I'm also sorry for wasting this illustrious paper as well, but hopefully it'll help me speak publicly better. But good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me speak here today. My name is Chloe Desir, and I'm the EJ organizer with the Ironbound Community Corporation here in Newark, New Jersey. I'm happy to be here with the news of a step forward in creating rules that will help alleviate the issue of lead in cities like Newark. The EPA's effort to strengthen lead paint standards is a crucial step towards protecting communities, particularly those already at high risk due to environmental injustices. The presence of deteriorated lead-based paint poses a significant health risk for children who come in contact with the toxic substance. Communities of color and those of lower income are often at a greater risk of lead exposure. Studies have shown that older homes owned or rented by low-income families are more likely to contain lead-based paint than newer properties. Additionally, historic racial segregation in housing known as redlining has contributed to the concentration of marginalized groups in neighborhoods with limited access to environmentally safe and affordable housing options. These systemic issues have perpetuated environmental inequities and increased communities' vulnerability to lead exposure. Unfortunately, the Ironbound is more than familiar with lead contamination while also being in the midst of heavy industry. It wasn't too long ago where our own community's athletic fields were found to be contaminated with lead, showing that addressing one source of lead is not enough. It's been reported that around a quarter of Newark children under the age of 6 have lead in their bloodstream, and this is a big concern where lead exposure can cause learning and behavioral problems. EPA's proposal to strengthen lead paint standards is a strong first step towards alleviating these issues, and eliminating lead-based paint is an essential component to advancing environmental justice. By setting higher standards for safe living environments across all communities, regardless of race or socioeconomic standards or status, EPA strives for a more equitable distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. This commitment aligns with broader goals aimed at reducing disparities and promoting healthier living options for all individuals. By addressing the disproportionate burden faced by EJ communities through targeted measures such as stricter regulations on renovation activities involving potential sources of lead, the EPA aims to advance environmental justice, but only if we can guarantee that this rule will be just as strong throughout the rulemaking process, if not stronger. It's imperative that no one's bias weakens the ability to improve the lives of those living in overburdened communities and of everyone. Eliminating lead-based paint is a crucial step towards achieving healthier and more equitable living environments for everyone. Thank you. I'd also love to introduce Eve Gardner, the Director of Toxic at Earth Justice.
Good morning or afternoon, I've lost track of time, everyone. As Chloe said, I'm the Director of Cross-Cutting Toxic Strategies at Earth Justice. I'm really honored to be here today to recognize the significance of EPA's announcement. EPA's lead hazard standards have never been set to truly identify dangerous levels of lead, even though Congress charged EPA with accomplishing that more than 30 years ago. So today's proposal, which finally acknowledges that any exposure to lead at any level is a hazard, is a gigantic leap forward in this country's long-delayed efforts to eliminate or at least significantly reduce lead exposures among the millions of people that live in housing that's contaminated with lead-based paint, as well as the many, many children who still attend child care facilities where lead paint is still present. So I want to just take a minute to give some of the backdrop to today's proposal. In 2009, 12 organizations and a pediatrician filed a petition with EPA asking it to update its lead hazard standards. And notably, the organization that Deputy Administrator, Janet McCabe headed when she was in Indiana, which was Improving Kids' Environment, was one of the groups that joined that 2009 petition. Now, EPA promptly granted the petition, and it started to develop a rule, but it didn't get very far in the process. And in 2016, a team of lawyers at Earth Justice got involved, and we sued EPA for what's legally called unreasonable delay. And the court agreed with us that EPA had a legal duty to ensure that its lead hazard standards reflect the most current science, and it ordered EPA to promptly modify its very outdated rules. EPA did update the standards in 2019, but the levels it adopted then were still dangerously high and would have resulted in a large proportion of children suffering serious health harms from lead exposure merely from living in housing that had levels of lead that the Trump administration rule considered to be non-hazardous. And that was by EPA's own admission back in the Trump administration, that children would lose IQ points living in housing that they said was hazard-free. So we filed another legal challenge, and the court agreed that the Trump EPA's dust lead standards were illegal and had to be redone. Of critical importance, the court ruled that EPA's hazard standards must be based entirely on what is known about the health impacts of lead without considering the feasibility of testing or cleanup. So that brings us to today. Earth Justice and our clients in these 2 rounds of litigation, who are in groups across the country, are incredibly grateful that EPA is finally proposing standards that reflect their lived reality and experience. And their lived reality, as we've heard today, is that any exposure to lead can result in serious health harms, including learning deficits that deprive children of their chance for a bright future, and a heightened risk of death from cardiovascular disease among adults. And their lived experience is that every exposure to lead from every source, whether dust or water or soil or air, adds up in their bodies, increasing the likelihood of harm. So it's imperative that EPA strengthen its lead paint standards as it takes gigantic strides to address lead in drinking water and other sources. So we hope that the rules you are proposing today are finalized expeditiously and without being weakened by the inevitable industry pressure we know you'll face, and then implemented vigorously. Our children are counting on you to do that. And before I step down, I want to give a big shout out to the groups that Earth Justice represented in the fight to get stronger lead paint standards. A Community Voice in New Orleans, California Communities Against Toxics, Healthy Homes Collaborative in LA, New Jersey Citizen Action, New York City Coalition to End Lead Poisoning, Sierra Club, United Parents Against Lead National based in Richmond, and We Act for Environmental Justice in Harlem. Without their resolve to keep fighting for environmental justice, we would not be here today. And I want to introduce Anjali Ramos, who's the New Jersey Sierra Club director. And Sierra Club, again, was one of the petitioners in the litigation.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. As mentioned, my name is Anjali Ramos. I'm the director of the New Jersey Sierra Club. Thank you for hosting this amazing news release here in New Jersey. We are honored to have you. The New Jersey Sierra Club is honored to be here today in support of EPA's dust lead hazard and clearance rule, a rule that is so crucial not only for environmental reasons, but also for the health of our children and communities, as it's the theme of today. It is also an honor to be here in Newark, recognizing Mayor Baraka's outstanding work in cleaning up the city from lead. This rule makes the much-needed revisions to the dust lead hazard standards, as our children's health is uncompromisable. Science is constantly evolving, and new findings need to be reflected in our rulemaking so that we're able to have the highest levels of protections for our loved ones. No one's home should ever be a hazard. We all know about the devastating health impacts from lead exposure and lead paint residues left in outdated infrastructure. Lead-contaminated dust, which is generated when lead paint deteriorates, is one of the most common causes of elevated blood levels in levels of lead in blood in our children. This condition is often long-term, irreversible, as mentioned previously, and tragically completely preventable. Even mild levels of exposure have resounding impacts, which makes this rule even more important, and which is why we keep hearing no level of lead is safe for children. While lead exposure has dramatically reduced over the last 3 decades as a result of incredible federal, state, and local regulatory efforts, that progress has not been realized equally across the country for all of the reasons that Chloe just mentioned. And lead exposure remains one of the top childhood environmental health problems in minority and low-income communities. While the poisoning crosses all socioeconomic, geographic, and racial boundaries, the burden of this epidemic clearly falls disproportionately on communities of color and low-income communities, which are more likely to live in older and poorly maintained housing that contains high levels of lead paint and dust. Indeed, children in low-income households are 3 times more likely, and African American children are twice as likely as white children to have elevated blood levels of lead, according to CDC data. This action by the EPA will lower the dust lead hazard standard from 10 micrograms per square foot to any number larger than 0, which is incredible, as determined by recognized labs. This reflects the zero tolerance standard for continued lead contamination, and the Sierra Club is proud to be here today in support. The Sierra Club, as mentioned by Eve, along with a coalition of environmental justice and healthy housing organizations and represented by Earth Justice, call on the US EPA many years ago through litigation to take action to strengthen outdated lead-based paint regulations, and we are here today to support and celebrate this gigantic step forward. Thanks to this rule, we are that much closer to eliminating health risks associated with lead and better protecting future generations. Everyone has a right to feel safe in their homes, and this dust lead hazard rule allows us to make that ideal a reality. Thank you very much for having me, and now I will pass it back to the EPA Assistant Administrator Friedhoff. Thank you.